questions for the crew to pass them to the inner aisles, and we'll have some people come down and collect those from you while I give you some introductory information. My name is Tony Sparks. I'm the store manager at the National Atomic Museum, and on behalf of the National Atomic Museum and the Museum Foundation, I want to welcome you to an extraordinary event. We're calling it the Enola Gay Reunion and Legacy for reasons that I will explain, and it should become evident very soon. In March of this year, we were fortunate to have General Tibbetts out for a book signing and a similar lecture event. And it was so well received, so overwhelmingly appreciated, that we began making plans at that time to see if we could congregate the rest of the crew and bring them out for this special event. And it turned out that this was the weekend that we could get them all together and bring them out. And I think you can appreciate what a historically significant and otherwise exciting opportunity this is. As far as the museum itself goes, we appreciate the support that you have given us, and it's important for you to know that the National Atomic Museum is a going and growing entity. We're changing and growing every day. We are truly a national museum now, chartered by Congress, and we have lots of big plans for the future. Your participation tonight and participation in future events is part of what makes that future possible. So I just wanted to stress to any of you who haven't already done so, consider Museum Foundation membership to help fund and support our future. There's a lot of opportunities to help as volunteers, to give donations of time or money, and just to participate and support our events like you're doing tonight that will make our museum continue to grow the way it has been. I wanted to remind you also that tomorrow will be the final day of book signings by the crew. They will be at the museum from 11 to 2:30. The schedule is 11 to 2:30. We will stop selling items at 2 o'clock tomorrow. So if you have something you want signed, to be sure and be there by 2, because the crew finishes at 2:30, and they deserve, after a long weekend, to have the chance to go home promptly. For safety reasons, I need to tell you where the fire exits are. So I almost forgot that. At either of the exits on the sides of the museum, of the lobby, or out through the lobby where we came in, are exits for fire emergencies. And your seat cushion can be used as a flotation device. Before we begin the symposium portion, I would like to have a brief background video that sort of tells the story. This was produced by a company called Greenwich Workshop, and simply enough, it's entitled Enola Gay. That tells a lot, but we'll hear a lot more right from the mouths of the men who experienced it. I do want to mention that we ask you to not videotape or audio tape the symposium tonight. There will be an official videotape produced, and it may or may not be available for distribution at a later time. And you may take photographs, but if you have the non-flash camera, that's preferred. Otherwise, you'll have opportunities for flash photos at the end. Alrighty. It's my distinct privilege to be able to introduce to you the crew of the Enola Gay. I'm going to bring them out one at a time, and we'll have them take a seat. I hope they found where their seats are there. The crew may want to look at their nameplates to know where they're seating. The format of the remainder of the event will be a presentation by the crew telling their story individually and collectively, and then an opportunity to field the questions that you all put on your question sheets. Those will be distributed among the crew. They've been organized and put in a logical order here for everybody. We may not get to all of your questions. Please understand there's a lot of people here with a lot of things on their mind, but we will definitely try and cover all of the main issues and the main questions that you have. We'll try to wrap it up right at 8:55 so we can be out by 9. And if we, for some reason, actually run out of questions that are written, we may, but probably won't, be able to take questions live from the audience. So now, I would it gives me great pleasure to introduce the people that I've had a pleasure of meeting this weekend. First, the Enola Gay Navigator, Major Theodore Dutch Van Kirk. Careful, look. The Enola Gay Bombardier, Colonel Thomas Farabee. I think you're on the end, Dutch. Dutch, you're on the end. And Tom? And Tom, I believe you're second? No. And then General Tibbets is in the middle here. That's the general's chair, sir. Dutch, I think you're on the end. Nothing personal. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the pilot of the Enola Gay, General Paul Tibbets.
I think we can sit down now. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for the welcome. We're delighted to be here. We cooked this up between us, so I'm speaking for them temporarily. I'd like to just give you a couple of words on the format of our program that we have used over the period of the last 3 years. We try to get an audience interested in the things that they want to know rather than what we think they should know. And on the basis of that, I think you're going to get a sample tonight because we have written questions from many of you out there, and they will be read by the man that ably assists me in all of these things. I'd like to introduce the man that will be helping me, Mr. Gary Newhouse. Gary, come on in. I'll turn the microphone over to Gary and let him get started.
Don't hear a buzz? Paul brought some aliens from Roswell with him, and I think they're serving.
Thank you. Thank you.
If we're moving a little slow tonight, we just had a wonderful dinner with Bev and Dick Campbell. I had to unbutton my coat because I can't button it right now. I want to begin by, on behalf of the crew, by thanking the professional staff and volunteer staff of the National Atomic Museum. You people who live in Albuquerque and get to see this wonderful facility are very lucky. The staff has done everything to make our business very comfortable. We found out this afternoon that the airbase was closed to civilians, and Tony and Jim made special arrangements to have off-site pickup locations for buses to bring many of the civilians on to meet these men. So I just want to thank you on behalf of the crew for making this all possible. We're also very fortunate tonight to have one of the young Air Force warriors with us, and his name is Captain Paul Tibbets, Paul W. Tibbets IV. Obviously General Tibbets' grandson, and Paul's going to come up here and we may have a couple of questions for him. Paul flies the B-2 Bomber out of Whiteman Air Force Base, and he's in the 509th, which is the group that his grandfather started at the beginning of World War II. So it's Can you all still hear me? Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're on.
Okay. This is a lot of questions. We're going to try to...
I got a question. I've answered my own question. I wondered if a microphone was allowed.
Yeah. Can you, everyone say something, baby?
Something.
Hello, I'm here.
I usually talk loud enough that I don't need a microphone. Some of these questions were directed to individuals, but many of you may have attitudes or something to say about it, so just jump in when you can. The first question is, where were you when Pearl Harbor was attacked? You don't have to answer this question. we could start with
Not
General.
bad for a Marine, huh?
Well, I was at about 2,000 feet above ground, flying an A-20 from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to Savannah, Georgia, which was my station. At that time, I was about 20 miles or 25 miles north of Savannah when the radio came on, because, you know, in those days we didn't have satellites and sophisticated communications that we got today. We had to follow a needle that was tuned in to the radio station. That is a strictly broadcast radio station, wherever you wanted to go, and they had one. And of course, Savannah had a radio. So I was following the needle to Savannah, and a man comes on excitedly, and he says, "Stand by, please. We have an announcement to make rather quickly, as fast as we get some more information." Well, he didn't hardly finish that statement when he said, "The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor." And I thought, oh God, what is Orson Welles doing now?
Tom, where were you when you found out Pearl Harbor was attacked?
Well, I was about 3 months into bombardier training, ground phase at Maxwell Field Air Force Base in Alabama. And I was naturally at a party that Saturday night in town at the Integrated Hotel. I was even at a dance, although I couldn't dance. And we got an announcement about midnight, return to base immediately and send your civilian clothes home with war. So that day they sped it up to where I started flying phase in Albuquerque in January, and June, last of June, I'm in England with Paul on B-17.
Dutch?
I was in a primary flying school at Sikeston, Missouri. I think I'd been there about 2 weeks, just about maybe 3 weeks, maybe 4 weeks. I'm not sure which. And I just, as I recall, finished the primary, my first solo flight about that previous week. So I think I was probably out celebrating that Saturday night. And where I was particularly on Sunday morning, I can't tell you. I don't know.
I'm sure you was at church.
Tom says I was at church. That he knows me better than I do.
This is a question directed to all three of you. Did you fly missions together in Europe? And will you tell us some memorable moments? You better not answer this one, Tom.
Yeah, I've got to answer part of it. Oh, I thought you
No, I was joking.
Look at that. He wants me to answer the questions.
Well,
Okay. All kidding aside, yes, we flew quite a few. We flew some that were interesting, some that were not quite so interesting, and some that were kind of tough. But I think the most memorable one that we flew, for my money, was not a combat mission. But when we flew General Eisenhower and his staff from England down to Gibraltar for the beginning of the North Africa invasion, there were so many things that took place at that time. I had a little experience flying sour weather, but that was the worst weather that I ever undertook. It was as close to 0-0 taking off from London as you could possibly come up with. We were late. We were waiting for more weather reports, and one of the things, there were 3 airplanes involved, and on the second airplane, General Eisenhower was scheduled to fly with me in my lead airplane, which is the Red Gremlin. And General Doolittle was on the second airplane, which was, no, I'm sorry, he was on the third airplane to fly out. The man on the second airplane, I don't know who was, from Eisenhower's staff was on that airplane. Captain John Knox was flying. They went down in the water after they took off, and we didn't see them. But we were waiting there with the B-17. We're all under the wing of it, cold, miserable. The fog was causing condensation and water to drip from that airplane down our backs and necks and everything else. And we've been doing this for about 3 hours. And the weatherman comes and he said, I can't give you any hope. There's no forecast change in the weather. It's going to be the same as it is right now. General Eisenhower looked at Jimmy Doolittle and he said, Jimmy, what should we do? Well, Jimmy Doolittle, he never was short on words. He said, I'm not flying the airplane, ask Paul. He's the guy that makes the decision. And so the General looked at me and I looked back. I said, General, if I was going to fly this airplane with just my crew and myself, I'd have been on the way. But I have to stop and think about the people that I'm carrying down there with me. He said, Paul, I got a war waiting on me. Let's go. We got in the airplane. We're led out by a Jeep. And I guess Tom had probably as good a sight of that anything. Tom, tell him what you saw taking off.
I could barely see the nose of the airplane. And I couldn't even see the center line. It was about it's the worst I was ever in, as far as taking off. But I'd like to, as far as my first memorial mission, was our first one. I became a lead bombardier, it's like Dutch became a lead navigator because it was on his crew. So he didn't know what he was getting stuck with. So the first mission, I'd never bombed at 26,000 feet and never flown that high but once. I think it just before we left on the mission, a few days before, they sent us up to fire guns at high altitude. 12,000 was the highest ever bombed in bombardier school, so I didn't know where to look for a target at that altitude. So Dutch kept hitting me on the head and said, there it is, there it is. It was just a railroad yard. You know, most people could see it, but I couldn't tell where it was. But finally, I saw it just in time to scatter bomb somewhere in the area. So I remember that to this day, I'll tell you. I just didn't know where to look, but I was experienced because he was lead bombardier.
Well, there are a number of them. I think these fellows could probably tell the stories better than I could, but I think you have to say that the first ones we flew in North Africa, where we refueled our own plane, we loaded our own bombs. No ground crews, nothing else. The air crews loaded their own bombs, and then we refueled the B-17 out of 5-gallon gas cans, and then we took off and flew the mission. And as I recall, we flew 2 missions that way, or 2 or 3, with where we had to refuel out of the 5-gallon gas cans. And from a standpoint of the amount of sweat labor that went into it, they were the most memorable, believe me.
You remember your map?
Oh, yeah. Paul went to ask him for a map of where we were going and everything, and he came back with the Standard Oil road map and gave it to me. I remember that. It did show the target, I will say that.
Before I ask this next question, I want to ask the audience, are there any former non-commissioned officers in the audience? Maybe one?
Yeah.
Don't be ashamed.
There's a lot of them in here.
All right, good. You'll like this story. Will you tell us a story about George Patton?
Should I?
I think you should.
Okay. We're talking about the year it could have been 40, early 40. George Patton was an instructor in the infantry school at Fort Benning, Georgia. He had the rank of a lieutenant colonel. I was a second lieutenant assigned to Flight B of the 16th Observation Squadron. And our mission in life was to support the infantry school and everything that they did. Okay, Patton had a lecture with the students, and these were all captains and some just appointed majors in the Army that had to be in that in that school. It's a 9-month course, but anyway, they were reasonably senior officers as far as that's concerned. He's lecturing on tanks. And I'm out there with the radio in a truck, so I can talk to an airplane and call it in at the right time. It is supposed to do something as far as his lecture is concerned. Well, we get to the point that tank comes up from the motor pool, and it stops, and the sergeant gets out of it and stands there. And George Patton, he was a lieutenant colonel. I think maybe I said that. He is pointing out that tank. It was new to Fort Benning, but it was not a new tank. Now, in those days, we had money problems, too, because lots of times trucks ran around and had signs on it, I'm a tank, or what, for maneuver purposes. And he was talking about really the virtues of that thing. He could go across the ground out there 35 miles an hour. He could knock down trees that had trunks 6 to 7 inches in diameter. He could turn it on the proverbial dime and so forth. And he said, by the way, you see that shack down there? Well, it had been a plantation, and there was a caretaker's house down there. And it was a shack, except that you could see the bottom part of it. Instead of being cement blocks, it was stone. Well, he said, I'm going to get back and get a good run, and I'm going to hit that shack, and I'll show you how I can tear it up. And about that time, the sergeant walked over to pulling on his sleeve, and your dad said, Sergeant, let me alone. Can't you see I'm talking to the troops? Guy shrugs his shoulder, walks back to the tank. Patton finishes, goes over, he gets in it, cranks it up. Of course, in those days, they had radial engines in them. Man, this thing was making a lot of racket. And he takes off. He does everything he said he was going to do. He finishes his demonstration of knocking down trees and turning things short. He goes down. He gets a run for that shack down there, and he was doing at least 35 miles an hour, I'm sure. And he hit that thing, and debris flew all over. A big cloud of dust went up. The tank did not come out on the other side. But here comes George Patton climbing through the debris, brushing himself off, and everybody rushed down there to find out if he was dead or alive. And he just ignores everybody. He walks up to the microphone, and he said, gentlemen, if you didn't learn anything else today, you should have learned that it pays to listen to your sergeant. The sergeant wanted to tell him there was a basement in the house.
I'll admit that wasn't a question from the audience, but being a former sergeant, I always ask it. We had a lot of questions, and I didn't have time to put them in real chronological order. Pretty much the remainder of these questions deal with the atomic mission, but they may be a little bit out of order, so just bear with us on this. How were you able to keep the atomic mission so secret?
I think that was a kind of a natural phenomena. The Manhattan district was very security conscious. I don't need to tell you folks living in this area about it. They still are. Well, of course, we don't have a Manhattan district. But there's still a lot of things that have to be kept secret. Now, I would also advise you to remember we were at war at this particular time. I had the problem of forming an organization, and I told them, I said, you know, I'm not going to tell you anything except what you need to know. I don't want you going talking to your roommates at night in your same barracks that you're in. Don't do all of that. Let the other guys alone, and they'll leave you alone. Don't get your nose into anybody else's business. I don't want you to know too much. Just listen and take my word for it. If we are successful, we could bring a hasty conclusion to this war, and that's all I said. Now, the Manhattan District had agents in the thing. I had headed my security was a major by the name of Enola. He had been in Chicago at the Fermi Laboratory up there at the University of Chicago, and it is in the football stadium, below the football stadium, I should say. And there was a mole in that organization. And this particular mole had a habit of having a rendezvous with a Russian agent. They knew all of this, who he was, and they had a Russian agent on different evenings along about midnight, but they made a mistake of having their meeting under the same street light every time they had a meeting. And I said to him, I said, okay, now what did you do? He said, well, we had all their telephones bugged. We knew when they were talking and we knew when they were going to meet. And on this particular night, they set up their meeting for about 12 o'clock in the same place. And so my partner and I, we took our guns, put them in the back of our car. We went and got ourselves somewhere in the neighborhood of 50 yards or slightly less from that streetlight. And we just sat there till they came out. I said, well, what happened? He said, they met each other just like they said they were going to. They reached in their pockets, and this guy did, and took out some information, handed it to him. I said, what did you do? He said, well, we just took our guns and killed the bastards. I said, but isn't that kind of, isn't that kind of stiff and risky? He looked at me and said, Paul, who in the hell would pay any attention to a couple of stiffs lying in the gutter, stripped naked and without any identity in Scotland at midnight at night? That was his answer. But they were serious. And another thing that was serious is how serious they were, that when we were on Tinian Island with the 509, we had three security type passes at Wendover, and we had them on the island. You had one to get into the area and get into Wendover or into the area that we lived in. You had another one to get on the flight line. You had a third one to get into the airplane. Brigadier General that commanded our outfit, we were under his command. He just decided one day before lunch he wanted to see one of our airplanes. He got in his staff car with his driver, drove out to one airplane on revetment site, got out, started to walk up to the airplane, and the guard challenged him. He said, halt. And he said, I'm General Davies. I command this 315th wing. I want to take a look at that airplane. The guard says, General Davies, I recognize you. Do you have I think it was a green pass. Do you have a green pass? He said, I don't need a green pass. The guard says, to get on this airplane you do. He reached in his pocket, took out his AGO card and threw it at the guard's feet and started to take one step forward. And the guard leveled his gun, cocked it. He said, General, one more step and you're dead. Well, I found out about this when I got called 30 minutes later up to the general's office, and he said to me, he said, would he have shot me? I said, there's no doubt in my mind. He said, I thought so. That's the reason I came back.
This is a question for Dutch. Where did you go to navigation school?
Navigation school at Kelly Field, Texas. And started about New Year's Day, as I recall, and we ended in March the 30th, I think, and we all were assigned to the 97th Bomb Group at Sarasota, Florida. And we went through it about, they took 30 people, and they found they suddenly didn't have any navigators, and they had airplanes, so they took 30 people and put them through the navigation school in 1/2 time. And that was fine, except when they started it, they also were doubling up on the calisthenics. And when we started sleeping through all of our classes, they decided that was too much, so they let up on that. But it took 3 months of navigation school to get out and join the 97th group.
This is for anyone. Any thoughts or impressions regarding Dresden? The Dresden firebombings, I imagine, is what the question is.
Well, I'll speak first. I can't because I didn't have anything to do with Dresden. I never even saw Dresden from the air, so I don't know. I mean, I know what everybody else knows. That's what I read about it.
Well, we saw bombing over there, but it was just another part of the war as far as I'm concerned. It did cause a lot of deaths, but that's necessary in a war.
Well, for those who don't recognize, Dresden was bombed by both the RAF and the American Air Forces in retaliation for what the Germans did at Coventry, where they essentially bombed Coventry off of the map. And in retaliation, why the German and the RAF and American Air Forces essentially wiped Dresden off the map. And there's always been a lot of arguments about the strategic importance of Dresden and that sort of thing, and a lot of people talk about Dresden in the same way that they talk about Hiroshima, and I think that's probably why the question was asked. Do I have any comments on it? As Tom says, it's part of war.
Can I inject something here?
Sure.
Dutch had brought up one word that triggered something in my mind. He said retaliation. That Dresden was bombed in retaliation for Coventry. It could have been, I don't know. But I want to say right away that the use of the atomic weapons was not in retaliation to any damn thing. The use of those weapons was brought to stop the killing. And it was just such a violent thing that they felt that in the long run, lives would be saved by doing that. So there was no vengeance. I've been accused of, I haven't been accused. I've been confronted by people who said, well, if they'd had white skins, you wouldn't have bombed. The hell I wouldn't. I would have bombed anything. But one of my orders was to bomb Germany and Japan simultaneously. At that particular time, you don't take your vengeance out on an individual, his religion, or his culture. You do it to stop the war or to win the war. Let's word it that way. That's about all I can say.
How many months before the actual dropping of the bomb did you start your training?
How many what?
How many months before the actual bombing mission did you have
With the 509th or my own training?
509th.
Oh, well, I got my instruction to form this outfit and organize it and train it in September of 44, excuse me. And we were active and we dropped our burst. We bombed in 11 months after putting everything together and doing all that we had to do, starting from scratch.
Did the Enola Gay maintain radio contact with the base during the flight?
No. Well, wait a minute. I said no quite emphatically because we had radio silence put upon us. We couldn't maintain radio contact.
Were other Air Force operations also undergoing at that time, or were you kind of in the air by yourself?
No, the 20th, I can't answer that except for the 20th Air Force. The 20th Air Force put out orders when we got our orders to go, and we knew by that time what area of Japan we were going into. They put out orders that there would be no aircraft, reconnaissance or otherwise, within a 500-mile radius of that area. So we were, to all intents and purposes, alone, I think.
I'm sorry.
I'm sure at least that's exactly what it was, as far as I know.
Did any of you get to meet any presidents?
Yes, I'm sure Paul did. I did too. I met General Eisenhower, and I met President Kennedy, and I met President Johnson. I think that's. I never met President Truman.
The only president that I met was Harry Truman, and this was in 1948. I got called to his office with two other officers. One was Jimmy Doolittle, one was a man by the name of Dave Schilling, a colonel who had introduced aerial refueling because of his experience in England as an attaché. He saw the British, working with it, and he thought, boy, that's a great idea. So he came back. When he came backstage, he started doing it. We were called over. Gerald Spots was chief of staff of the Air Force at that time. And when we were seated in the office there, first off, will you have a cup of coffee? And everybody acknowledged that by a head nod or yes. And we were served coffee. The seating arrangement was kind of neat, I think, if I can use that word. Spots, Doolittle, and Schilling were sitting in front of the desk about 3 to 4 feet, facing the president. I was sitting at the president's right hand, facing him at the side of his desk. And so the thing starts with the president congratulating General Spots for the progress that had been made with the independent Air Force and all that, which he signed that bill. And Spots thanked him very much. And then he looked at Jimmy Doolittle and he said, Jimmy, he said, that was quite a feat that you pulled and flying those B-25s off of that carrier. And he said, yes, sir. But he said, it really wasn't that bad. And the president looked at Dave Schilling and he said, Colonel, he said, that was a unique thing that you came upon. He said, the aerial refueling is going to be a great thing someday. And he said, I think we can say you started it in the U.S. Air Force. And Schilling thanked him. And he turned and he looked at me and didn't say anything. And then he came out and he said, what do you think? I said, Mr. President, I think I did a pretty good job. He said, you're damn right you did. And he said, anybody ever give you a hard time? I said, well, once in a while. He said, the next one that does, he said, please refer them to me. I'm the man that sent you.
I would like to correct one thing. I said, at the time I met General Eisenhower, he was not a president, because they met him the same time I did. But I met President Kennedy. DCM was B-47 wing in Savannah, Georgia during the Cuban fiasco. And he came down after it was over to thank us. And that's where I met him. And then I met President Johnson still when I was down at Ramey in B-52s. And he went to Lockheed in Atlanta to cut the ribbon for the first C-5. We announced to the press, as I said, we're going to Ramey for 3 days. So I was playing golf on a Saturday, and the wing commander saw me go to the golf course, because he lived right next door to it. I got on the second hole, and he called me and said, Tom, I need you immediately. He saw me go play golf. What the hell is that? So I go charging over there in my golf cart. He said, we really got a problem, Tom. I said, what is it? And he and the base commander said, the president's going to land in an hour. He said, what we're going to do? I said, well, you got a thing in your office that tells you exactly what to do. I have one in mind. So I said, what they'll do, they'll come in, they'll check the airplane will come in ahead. They get up on the hangars, they'll check it out. They'll show you where they want to park the airplane. All I have to do is put some fuel aside so it won't get contaminated to refuel it. Then we get out of the way. Well, that's the way it worked. I'd done it at Savannah with President Kennedy. Well, that's where they landed, and he shook my hand when we got off the airplane and went to the golf course. I was there 3 days, and that's all I saw. He had his daughter and little girl with him, a little baby. And the only problem the base commander had, they didn't have a new bed for the baby. And that caused quite a disturbance. Over that, there was no problem.
What was the most difficult part of the Hiroshima mission?
Keeping Tom awake.
I was going to say putting up these two. It was so simple that you can't believe it, but I'll let you go. I'm sorry.
No, I'd have to say, ladies and gentlemen, truthfully, there was nothing difficult about that mission. Dutch had the most difficult job, and that was navigating to get us up to a certain magic point to start a run towards the target, and then Tom getting lined up with the thing and causing the bomb to be released. But there was nothing difficult about it. To me, it was just standard routine. And I've answered that question in some ways by saying it's the most boring damn flight I ever took. Everything went like it was supposed to.
I hope you take this question in the way it was asked. Are any of you hams? Then underneath it says call signs.
I thought you were talking about acting. I was saying we all are.
And then
I'm radio operator.
Then there's something under any Luscombe pilots.
Any what?
I can't read this.
Don't hand it to me. I don't know if I can.
I don't know if that has something to do with ham radio or whatever.
Oh, frequency bands for the thing? Okay, call signs. I was a ham, was a K4, and during my career at that, before I got so hard of hearing and gave it all up, I had an altitude on my antenna quite a few times at 40,000 feet. I had others at sea level, and I had some others at ordinary street level. So, yeah, I was a K4.
Could I interject one here on that?
I'm sorry.
I'll assure you he's a ham operator. Because we were on England one time in B-47, and I wanted to listen to a ball game. He's on the ham radio talking to somebody in Alaska, and he said, how high is your antenna? The guy said 40 feet or 50 feet. How high is your pulse? Said 40,000. So I assure you he's a ham operator.
Have any of you visited Hiroshima or met any of the survivors?
I have not.
Tom, you
I've met survivors from there, but not over there.
Oh, yeah, I've met survivors,
Yeah.
but not on the ground over there.
Do you feel people's opinion of the bomb has changed over the decades? Dutch, why don't you start off?
You guys thought, Dutch?
Well, number one, it has changed over the decades because most of the people don't know much about it. they form a lot of opinions. You know, we got in a situation in this country where if you mention the word atomic or nuclear or something of that type, it sounds like a dirty word. And so people that don't know anything about it, and then they hear about all the bad things about nuclear or atomic energy, and they never studied about it in high school or anything of that type, they get bad opinions of it. So a lot of people just in general have a bad opinion of nuclear or atomic energy. But I do believe that anybody who has studied about it and learns a little bit about it, talks about it, if they talk to us about it or anything of that type, come to one of these seminars, in general, I don't think it's changed a whole lot. I do believe that the World War II generation is probably much more patriotic and about it and everything than the younger generation is, but most of that is simply because the younger generation just doesn't think about it as much, in all probability. And in any audience of 100 people, you're going to find one or two that are more violent or pretty strong anti-nuclear sentiments. And sometimes they'll express them, sometimes they'll just sit there and listen and everything of that type. But I generally try to bring them out if I can in this sort of thing so I can argue with them. And 9 times out of 10 you'll find they will change their opinion. And we also have a fairly strong number of so-called historical revisionists in the country. But I'm going to let Paul talk about that because I think he knows about it, but just as much as I do, if not more.
Oh, yeah, I've got an opinion. I don't know how valid it is because I don't know what size of population it represents. But my basic reaction is, over the years, first off, after the war was over with, nobody wanted to talk about anything. Forget it all. And because we've been through that, we won the war, and let's go back and live a normal life. That probably lasted for something in the neighborhood of 7 to 10 years, in my opinion. The other thing is then the Russians, they come into it with a lot of anti-nuclear propaganda. They want to shame the United States in the eyes of the world because they don't have one of these bombs. They don't have a delivery system. So they got to make us look like crazy people. And of course, I don't know how many of you followed the scenario of this deal with the veterans and the Air Force Association concerning the Smithsonian's attitude in the Air and Space Museum about displaying Enola Gay. And believe me, the way that thing came out, what caused the problem was that they had a scenario proposed that made us look terrible. What we were aggressors. The Smithsonian said this, that what we were doing, we were opposing the Japanese, and they were defending, as during the war, they were defending their culture and their heritage. Well, I don't know, I don't think too many nations would want to, foster that kind of thing. What I'm saying is the revisionists were controlling the minds at that particular time. They were giving out all the thoughts. And on the basis of that, we went through that thing. We won a battle, but I don't know whether we won the war or not because they're still very strong. They're very strong in our educational systems in the United States. I don't know how many of you got young children that are in the first few elementary grades and going into the high school, but you better look and see what they're being taught because they're being taught a lot of stuff that I don't know whether you believe in it, but I don't believe in it. I believe in history as it took place. And of course, their thesis is there is no history. It didn't take place that way. There's something other about it. I'm not a revisionist, so I can't give you their thesis. But today, I've seen in the past year and a half, I've seen an attitude that's a little bit different. We have a young element today that have done a little bit of reading on their own, and they're beginning to ask questions. And I think that's one of the things that makes me want to get out to, I call this a dog and pony show. In other words, we get up here and we go through certain things, and we tell you certain things, answer your questions. This is good because it gets into some of these young people's mind that we weren't a bunch of crazy idiots when we did that. We did what we had to do. And I'll leave it at that.
Are there any individuals in the audience who were at least teenagers during World War II? If you could stand up, or anyone who was in World War II in a combat theater?
There's a number around here. Jerry, let me just add here, the tide is turning. I think you should all recognize that. We went through a low ebb on that, I think, during the Korean War and as a result of the Vietnam War and as a result of the Vietnam War. But I honestly feel that among the young people today who are really studying, the tide is turning, and I could give you chapter and verse on that. The young people who won second place in the National History Contest a year ago based on Truman's, they wrote a thesis on Truman's decision to drop the atomic bomb. They were very supportive of it. We talked to them a lot. They talked to the people at Cal Berkeley. They talked to the Japanese embassy and everything of that type. And one of the things I do in California is I spend most of my time, so when I talk, is talking to the colleges and universities. And I can tell you, and in my opinion, the attitude of those people is changing now, and it's getting more favorable to the use of the bomb.
Great. There's several parts to this question. Did you have concerns about the B-29 as to its reliability, performance, avionics, those types of things? And what special preparations or modifications did you make to your aircraft?
Okay, the answer is, with those silver plate airplanes, I was certainly a long way from being worried about them. I thought they were pretty damn good. Now, the silver plate was a little bit different than the rest of them. I had 15 months experience testing B-29s at Wichita, Kansas, prior to being assigned to this particular job. And we started out, we had some terrible problems in that airplane, but you can't blame the airplane. The airplane was ordered into mass production before anything on it was ever tested. We didn't have an engine, a 3350 engine. They had two Wright whirlwinds, 11-cylinder engines developing 900 horsepower, and they married them together on a crankshaft, put a couple of turbos on them to boost their power. But that's an engineering feat and a mechanical feat, but my God, the problems that got introduced into those things with the ability to oil them, cool them, put fuel in the cylinders where they belonged, yeah, we had a lot of trouble. We had airplane troubles too for all kinds because it was a different designed airplane. We had pressure for the first time. And of course that was a godsend, I'll tell you, but after flying at B-17s the way we did in sub-zero temperatures and freezing your toes and your hands, I've got frostbitten feet and hands from that flying in North Africa. But anyway, by the time we got to that point, there was enough engineering savvy, there was enough things put together that an airplane could be modified to become reasonably reliable. And I don't know, you guys probably will go along with it. When I say reasonably, we weren't afraid to get in them and fly them because we didn't think it was going to kill us. Now, a lot of people got killed in those airplanes because, number one, they didn't have enough flying experience to meet an emergency. They didn't know how to handle it if they did. They did things that they should not have done and created accidents because of their lack of knowledge. But let me put it this way. When we got the okay to modify our airplanes and get the silver plate airplanes, I think they were the best B-29s that ever came off the production line.
Were you given a choice as to whether you wanted to participate in the mission or not?
No, in my day, you didn't get a choice about a damn thing. They told you what they wanted you to do, and you did it.
Does that answer the question?
Well, wait, did you give Tom and Dutch a choice?
Give them a choice, huh?
I was not there when the tail gunner said, Paul asked if we could volunteer or not.
I don't think that included you. You guys had to be there.
I never felt I had a choice.
There was one question I lost for Tom. Did you say bombs away or bomb away when you released the bomb?
Not that I know of. I mean, I might have.
Well, given the other part, Tommy, you lose 10,000 pounds from the nose of the airplane. Everybody knows
I
what
knew it
happened.
was gone, yeah. And I figured Paul did too, so I didn't worry about it. I looked out real quick and saw it going down, so I knew it was gone.
I would like to know if the Enola Gay encountered any Japanese air fleet resistance on the mission.
Let me put it this way. We encountered no resistance. Number one, those airplanes were stripped down and took all the weight out of them except for the tail guns in the rear. I took 7,200 pounds out of a standard produced airplanes. I had fuel injected engines on them and so forth and so on. I could fly that airplane if I had to. I could fly it at 42,000 feet and there wasn't anything else in the air. Nobody had an airplane that would fly at 42,000 feet, so I didn't worry about it. They didn't have any anti-aircraft that could come up to that height and do any danger.
Question for Tom or anyone. How long did you practice dropping test devices?
I guess I dropped my first one about in October and November of 44, and I continued to drop different ones up to, I left in July to go to Tinian.
What was the plan if the bomb had left the aircraft and not exploded?
There was no plan.
I couldn't have done much about it.
Well, let me know. Looking at it rationally. You're flying along over some kind of territory. It might be land, it might be water, and you're up at one of these higher altitudes. We've played around most of the time 30 or 31,000 feet, and if you lost it then, it's going to go down. You can't stop it. It's going to dig a hole, and it's going to be an awful damn deep hole, or it's going to go down in the water, and it's going to be lost. But we didn't have, I don't think we took too big a chance because, you see, we monitored those types of bombs when they were in the airplane. We had monitoring systems for their firing mechanism and the so-called warmth and comfort that bomb needed so it functioned properly. Am I on the right track?
That's right.
I mean,
Once
that wasn't a
it was
problem.
gone, nothing either one of us could do.
Did you meet Dr. Oppenheimer?
Yes, I did. I was around him 3 or 4 different times. He was a different person. I mean, he lived in a world all of his own. He was a brilliant man.
Do you have any short stories about him that?
Well, yeah, I know what you're driving at.
If you don't ask the real detailed questions, we've done this I have to add a little bit to it to bring.
Okay, I had to go to Los Alamos on one occasion for something. I forgot what it was, and Dr. Oppenheimer, whenever I came down there, he always met me at the front, and we'd walk back into the area where the labs were, and 2 guys that are more familiar with that place than I am keep me. But I met him, and Captain Dick Parsons was with him. We started walking down one of these long corridors where you got bays off on the right, and they had their classrooms or they had their offices or whatever. And we're walking along, and Oppenheim stops. He turns around, and he walks back, I don't know, 2 or 3 steps to the doorway to this room, and Parsons and I follow him, and we're looking over his shoulder. There's blackboards on 3 walls, all kinds of hieroglyphics on those blackboards, and one desk and this one man. And Oppenheim walks in to the front board. Down the left-hand corner, he takes and rubs something out and puts something in its place. And this guy behind the desk, he jumps up. He said, "I've been looking 3 days for that mistake," and that was Enrico Fermi.
Question for Dutch. What were your thoughts if you couldn't find the target city?
Ask me.
I never had any plans for not finding the target city, for heaven's sakes. I guess we just stooged around up there till we found something, but I can't imagine what. And It was just beyond my comprehension. I couldn't even think about it. But let's ask Tom what he'd have done.
I had to stop the airplane, let's check, see what
Tom, we were recently over down in Texas, and I got lost in the city one night. I don't know how I did that, but I did. And so I stopped, and I was looking at a map. Tom's sitting in the back seat, and he says, "You used to have a hell of a time doing this in a B-17.
Where did the Enola Gay take off from, and how long did it take to get to the target and back?
Well, it took off from Tinian, one of the Marianas Islands, about 60 miles north of Guam. It took about 6 hours and 15 minutes to get to the targets and about 6 hours to come back. So it's a 12-hour and 15-minute total flight.
How much of that time did Tom sleep?
12 hours.
12 hours.
Outstanding. What was your first impression when this is for General Tibbets, when they told you the magnitude of the bomb?
Well, I have to be honest with you. I had to use imagination, and I don't think my imagination was really good enough. But when they said it would explode with the force of 20,000 tons of TNT, I thought, gee whiz, I've never seen 1,000 tons of TNT explode. I've never seen 100 tons of it. I haven't seen any TNT explode. But I thought, geez, if that's 20,000 tons, that's going to be a damn big boom.
General Sweeney said great things about you in his book. How is he doing, and when did you last see him?
I don't think I've seen Chuck Sweeney in a year. I hope he's doing okay. The last I heard, I think he had a heart bypass. Didn't he? Or did we hear that? Or
He had a heart problem. I don't even know where he had a heart bypass. He had a real bad problem, but I don't know where he had an operation.
Well, okay, Chuck had a bad problem, but I haven't seen him actually from the time that the war ended and we got back home. Chuck was so busy in Massachusetts with politics that none of us saw him very much. And then the next thing that happens, he gets mixed up with the National Guard, and he travels all over the world, and I get telephone calls at my home in Ohio at anywhere from 8 o'clock in the morning till 2 or 3 o'clock the next morning. Could be at any time. There's always an inconvenient time, and he'd be on the phone telling me how much he loved me.
Jerry, these two fellows both have unlisted numbers, I want to tell you right now. I'm the only one that has a listed number, so I'm now getting the calls.
With calls like that, can't you imagine why we have them?
Well, but in any event, I talked to Chuck about a month ago. And,
Chuck's a good Irishman. He's an Irish politician, and he does all right. You probably know we've revised our book and added some information to it, and I put a chapter in there about Chuck and the Nagasaki mission, and I call it the luck of the Irish.
Did the bomb you drop have a name?
Little boy.
What was the normal rate of climb of the Enola Gay, horsepower generated by each engine?
Well, there was no normal, and that may sound funny, but whatever the weight of the takeoff was and the altitude you're going to go, we set up certain power settings that the engines would stand and take there. I think right here, when we were doing some of the bikini bomb testing, we dropped 3 bombs one morning at 25,000 feet. So we went to 25,000 feet, dropped bomb, came back down, reloaded 3 times. So how long were we taking to get to 25,000 feet?
That's been a long time, Paul.
Well, by today's standards, it's unheard of, yeah, but no.
I have no idea, I mean, how long it took to climb that. It's been so long.
We were taking at least an hour to get to 25,000. We were taking at least an hour to get to 25,000.
I think that's true.
Yeah,
Yeah.
about that.
Because sometimes we start out, as I remember, you start out with a load like that, you were climbing about 500 or 600 feet a minute, and you get up a little ways, and the next thing you're down 300 feet a minute. You got to keep going with that. I can't answer that without being, I got to have something specific to go on, and today I don't remember the numbers well enough. Each engine, the engines were developed in 2,000 horsepower each.
There's two questions that are very similar. So I'm going to ask before you answer the first one, let me ask the second one also. It's not often that a sergeant gets to tell a general. What was it like flying the Confederate Air Force's B-29 Fifi in the mid-70s at Harlingen after so many years away from it? Then somebody else asked, I heard you flew Fifi at Midland, Texas several weeks ago with your grandson. How did that feel?
Well, first off, the first statement is correct. I was real enthused with the Confederate Air Force, and I was enjoyed my ability to fly the Fifi. My first flight in Fifi to qualify for the Confederate Air Force, flying down at Brownsville and Harlingen. I hadn't been in a B-29 in 18 years, but I qualified, and my reaction is that once you fly an airplane, you can get back in and fly it again. They may change the gauges around a little bit, but the characteristics of the airplane are basically the same. And in this occasion, he's talking about the instructor pilot on that airplane had a couple of men that he wanted to give, I won't say stick time, he wanted to give time to fly the airplane. And Paul here is one of them. Paul's anxious to qualify in that airplane. And I can't believe him. It's so different. I used to love to drive Model T Fords, too. Well, anyway, no, it felt good to get back in the airplane. There's something about those old birds that you get them in your bloodstream and you can't get them out. I mean, you guys know that. You know how they sound. If you hear Fifi flying around, you know how it sounds. You can distinguish it from any other. And as I say, I was very happy to get to sit there and hold the controls and make a few turns and do that sort of thing.
How did P4 feel?
Huh?
How did P4 feel?
Was he scared?
Like you'd expect him to, like a professional.
See, I don't even have to answer the question.
We're saving some questions for you towards the end here. I will ask one of them. Is Captain Tibbetts married? Which one of you asked that question?
Stand up, girl.
How funny, it's not on there.
The question for Doug. How did you navigate to Hiroshima? And then there's these words: dead reckoning, visually, radios, VOR,
DME. They didn't have them in those days, but go ahead.
or TACAN. TACAN.
I don't even know what it means, the last one.
Okay. How'd you get there, Dutch?
Well, if you got lost between Iwo Jima and Japan, you were a pretty sorry navigator, that's all I can say.
Let me inject something here. You know, we're being a little bit facetious and we're laughing and joking because we're enjoying the hell out of this, if you don't know the truth. But these two guys are quite unique in their capabilities and abilities as demonstrated. As Dutch, how many hours to get up to
About 6 and a half.
about 6 hours to get
hours.
up to the target area. We were directed to bomb the target at 0900 hours local time. That was Tinian time. And we missed that by 15 seconds. So that's how we navigated, how we dropped the bomb, and so on. I mean, I can't say any more than that. Dutch is a wonderful navigator, celestial and sun lines.
Was.
And Tom is the best bombardier I ever flew with.
But basically, it was the dead reckoning primarily because it was daylight, and there was a little celestial fix in there because I just wanted to keep into practice and that sort of stuff. But there's really a line of islands from Iwo Jima up, and you can pick them up on the radar. And if you get lost, you are sorry sold. That's all I can say.
The reason I missed it about 700 feet, his ETA was off. I was supposed to drop it when he told me to.
You can imagine what it's like traveling with these guys. Was it fun? Did you have a good time overall with training for the mission?
How do you describe good time? Look, we were working under pressure, and we were dead serious about what we were doing. I don't think there was any time for horseplay or there any time to have fun. We were working to perfect our techniques and everything that we did, and that's the only way I can answer that.
Question for Tom. Did you understand the consequences of dropping the ball?
Well, no, I didn't understand exactly how much. I'd heard what the yield would be, but I didn't know enough about it to actually realize just what that meant. But as far as the consequences, I knew it killed somebody, and that's what happened. I mean, I knew that would be the consequences. Yeah.
This question is directed to all three of you. What is your strongest memory of that day?
Have you got one that stands out?
Well, I think that when I actually saw the results, and I sure was a full-hour detonation.
Well,
And it had gone off. That was about the most thing I remember about it.
that would be my reaction. That's general, you see, because people don't, maybe, ladies and gentlemen, maybe don't understand. When we dropped that bomb, we had to make a turn almost in reverse. In other words, we had to turn at 160 degrees to get tangent to the ever-expanding shock wave that was coming up from that thing. So here we are, we're flying along. The bomb leaves the airplane. I immediately rack it over and start this tight turn. And I had 42 seconds to make that turn of 160 degrees. I'm pulling it in, and the tail's back there protesting, you know, you're hurting me, take it easy. But on the other hand, I kept it right up against that border as far as I could. And by the time I was able to level the wings, it had exploded. We could see it in front of us. Then the next thing was to get the airplane and the crew out of that area. Didn't have time for anything else, but I continued then making the turn till I went back, I don't know, almost 180 degrees, wasn't it, Duck, to get out over the Sea of Japan? Well, anyway, okay, I wanted to get out over the Sea of Japan because that would be the best safety factor that I could come up with. We had assignments to do. We were supposed to observe everything that we could and talk to a wire recorder that was hooked to the interphone and do all of those things, take photographs with handheld cameras, etc. There was a lot to be done, but it was an ominous sight when, in my reaction, you could see Hiroshima just as plain as you could see the toes, if you took your own toes, if you took your shoes off. Right now, it's just as clear as a bell. When we turned around, here you had this big area of black boiling mess. And you could see on the periphery of the thing, you could see indications of civilization. But here this thing is boiling and it's going up to the sky. Sure, that's something, I mean, you remember that for a long time.
Do you often reflect on your fellow airmen who were lost in the war?
Well, we were very fortunate being on a cruise, and unless you lost one on your crew, others I always looked at as if they'd gone on leave or something when the crew would disappear or something. That's the way you had to look at it to keep it from bothering you, I think.
I think you think every once in a while about the guys that you knew well in the group and that sort of thing. Teddy Hokenstadt when his plane exploded in the air, and you know, Jesse Weichel and Bob Kohler and all those guys who were shot down. But I don't think you really stop and commiserate about it or reflect on it. It's you know, they're gone, and there's nothing you can do about it.
do you have any more reunions planned? And if you do, where and when?
Would you want to answer that question, Jerry?
Well,
Well, we talking about the group.
I think I'm not sure what they're talking about. I know the museum was calling this a reunion, and of course it is a reunion of somewhat. I think what this person was asking is,
509th
are
reunion?
there any 509th reunions coming up?
Yeah, there are 509th reunions coming, and if I can interject into this thing, my personal feeling is reunions are getting to be kind of a sad thing, because I go there and there are people missing, and that's beginning to bother me. The next thing is the people that are there are the people that came along, were in the 509th long after we left it, kissed it goodbye. And those are the people that are taking it over. They're having their reunions. So an organization by numbers having a reunion, but the gang that we knew is thinned out pretty thin now. And I'm hesitant. There's going to be one in Washington this coming year, 99, and I haven't sent in an application to, to attend it yet.
I plan to go to the 97th, which is B-17 in Savannah. That's the only one I plan to go to.
Well, there is a mini reunion of the Red Gremlin
Yeah.
in East Lake, Ohio.
East Lake, Ohio.
But that's going to be three of us there.
Yeah.
Four of
We're
us.
all left.
Four of us.
No, at least four.
At least four.
Who?
That's the original crew they're talking about.
We're talking East Lake now.
Horizontal Hay.
Yeah, well, Oral Split might be there. There's five of us left.
But the Red Gremlin group always gets together down in Georgia every year up at State Park down there. And if you ever had anything you'd ever do with the Red Gremlin, ground crew, flying crew, anything of that type, why, you're welcome there. In fact, if you just wander in, you're welcome.
Would you like to tell them how many missions the Red Gremlin, the aircraft, flew in Europe?
When this video thing was done, they wanted to do one on the Red Gremlin, and they went to the Boeing. Researchers went to the Boeing Airplane Company in Seattle and got the records out on that. Boeing had kept pretty good records on all their airplanes. They knew when they were shot down, where, and all that sort of thing. The Red Gremlin flew 283 sorties and flew back home. That's a B-17E. Flew back home. And the welcome it got was a boiling pot. They put it in, melted it down for the metal.
How did you personally feel about General Curtis LeMay?
Well, I think only two of us can answer that. Tom's got one opinion, and I got an opinion. I think I'm going to tell you what. He was a man of the time. He was a man that was needed. He knew what he was doing, and he was a hell of a good commander to work for because he let you know right away what he wanted. And he also was a man that's made a statement, if you don't do anything, you can't make a mistake. But by God, do something even if you make a mistake. Just don't make it twice.
Well, the way I look at him, he is a man that if you did your job correctly and stayed out of trouble, you was a good person. Otherwise, you better stay away from him.
What qualities were you looking for when you selected the components for the 509th, the individuals for the 509th?
Well, I'm the only one that did that, so I'll take the initiative here. First off, there were 1,700 people in that 509th when we started overseas, 1,700 plus. And I had the authority to requisition anybody that I knew. And the first two requisitions that two names that I put in that I wanted was Farabee and Van Kirk. And I got them. Well, when they got here there and found out what we were going to do, they came up with recommendations of men that they had worked with, flown with in their specialties. And I had had experience testing the airplane, and there was a lot of experience there. I don't know how many, but we put together a pretty strong outfit. They had a lot of capability. We got a good B-29 squadron to build on, and we got a good man to take charge of our transport squadron with C-54s and build on that. So I don't know what else to say.
That's it.
Did the crew of the Enola Gay know the exact nature of the mission beforehand?
Oh, tell everybody, look, at those guys on that airplane were not idiots. They knew something was going on, but they were respectful enough to keep their mouth shut. And they didn't say anything. But they were not told we were going out on a mission to drop an atomic weapon, no. I didn't tell them that till we were in the air.
Approximately how high above the ground was the ball when it exploded?
Between 15 and 1700, I can't remember exactly.
Yeah,
what.
15, 1700.
What was the mood like on your return to the base after the mission?
Our mood or the base's mood?
Who asked this question? Put your hand up. Which
Well,
one?
The overall feeling of people treated you and your crew.
Let me put it this way. We got a royal welcome. The Tinian, almost in its entirety, turned out. And half of Guam came up, I think. There were 4-star generals, admirals, and 2 stars, and all over the damn place. And everybody was delighted to hear that because they all thought like we did. That's going to convince the Japanese to stop fighting, and that meant that they were going to get to go home.
There were about 10 very similar questions about the Smithsonian controversy, and could you briefly discuss that and then tell the audience the status today of the Enola Gay?
Well, I think maybe that I gave the audience an indication a while ago talking about the Smithsonian revisionism and so forth. Well, it got to the point that the Smithsonian got tired of taking the heat, and they said, well, they had to get tired because Sam Johnson, who at one time led the Thunderbirds, is the representative from Texas. Sam told him, he said, look, he said, you better have a good exhibit because if we get 80% of your money, and if you don't exhibit this Enola Gay right, you're not going to have any damn money. Well, they said, well, we don't know how to exhibit it. And they didn't know how. They didn't know how to follow history and to portray it as it took place and what really happened. There was a man by the name of George Hicks that was with this outfit that made this video, and I got a dry mouth. And they asked if he was a historian too. He knew a lot. He knew how to exhibit things, how to run a museum. And so on the basis of that, they said, well, George Hicks, they talked this to the, what's the name of that outfit? Greenwich Workshop. They talked to the Greenwich Workshop, will you let George Hicks do this exhibit for us? And of course they asked George if he wanted to, and George made it very clear, if you let me do what I want to do, I will do it. But anybody start messing in with me and telling me to do something different, I won't touch it. He was told by Secretary Hyman that he could have his own way, he could do anything he wanted to do to exhibit that airplane. Okay, if those of you that saw the exhibit while they're going there, I'll tell you one thing, by the time that they got ready to tear it down in the month of May because the building was coming apart, that's serious. The walls were starting to erode and give way in there, and they had to take it down. But it had 5 million visitors, and that's the most visitors that had attended any Smithsonian exhibit. Star Wars, I don't know, one on Lindbergh, nothing touched that. It was a very popular thing with the public, and it should have been because it showed the good and the bad. It showed what the airplane did. It showed it didn't try to change anything about the devastation that was wrought and the things that happened to people that were in Hiroshima. It showed them plain as could be. And, okay, we had a reunion, 2 years ago in Dayton, Ohio. And the question then was, they were having a hard time getting money to work on that airplane. And we were just about to conclude that reunion when the chairman of the reunion came in and he said, "I've got an announcement to make." We were all gathered after as a matter of fact, young Paul talked about his B2. We were there waiting. It was going to be our last night. Following the banquet, we were going to be leaving. And who was the chairman?
Taylor.
Ralph Taylor's son.
Ralph Taylor's
Ralph
son.
Taylor's
His name was.
son, yeah. One of my airplane commander's sons. Ralph was a good young man. He came in, he said, "I'm delighted to be able to tell you I've just gotten off the telephone with Secretary Director Ingman. He's a retired admiral at the head of the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum. And he said he had a visit this afternoon from a man that he knew quite well and a man who wished to remain anonymous. He asked me, how much will it take to restore that airplane, Enola Gay? And Ingman says, my God, we've been working on it for months. We knew exactly what it was going to take to do it. He said, $5 million. The man sat down at his desk, at Ingman's desk. He took out his checkbook. He wrote him a check for $5 million plus 10%. He said, I want to see that damn airplane restored. They got no problem with money now. The money's there.
Jerry, I think we ought to announce some of the Smithsonian's plans, because what the Smithsonian cannot exhibit the entire Enola Gay in the space they have. They're going to build a new facility at Dulles Field. It's going to be a privately financed facility. If you haven't been hit up with for a donation yet, well, you will be, believe me, if you're interested in aviation and everything else. So we've all seen the plans for the new exhibit building, where they're going to have the Blackbird and the Enola Gay, and I don't know whether they'll put all these old B-2s in it and everything of that type. But it's really going to be
Kettle Black right there.
But they plan to open it in the year 2001. I don't know whether any of us will make it, but some of you might.
There's three more questions. I think that covered all the questions relating to the mission in World War II and the Enola Gay. There's three more questions directed to the three of you, sort of political kind of questions, so I'm going to hold those, if you don't mind, for just a minute. And there's a few questions for Captain Tibbetts, give you guys a chance to take a breather. And then when I ask the political questions, I can leave real quick, see?
Yeah,
So
put him on the front burner.
we'll put him on the burner for a little bit. What was the best advice your grandfather gave you when you joined the Air Force?
I'll leave the room.
I think it's important that everyone understand how exciting and humbling it is for me to be around these guys. You know, people often ask me about my name and things like that, and I say it's a privilege to be able to hang out with these guys. You get to hear them talk at a seminar like this, but I get to see them pretty often, and it's very humbling, but it's also quite a privilege. When I was growing up, I didn't see my grandfather as much in my early years, but as I started getting interested in the Air Force Academy, one day we were sitting down, I can still picture it, we're sitting down, having dinner, eating seafood in a restaurant in Montgomery, Alabama, where I grew up. And I was going to the academy, talked about going to the academy, and I was excited about going to the Air Force Academy, and was a little nervous about it. My father was not active duty, so I didn't have a lot of experience in the Air Force and this kind of thing. So he was sitting next to me and was trying to tell me how to cut my steak right, because I wasn't cutting my steak just right. And once we got steak and shrimp, I said seafood, so in case you were wondering if I am crazy. He leaned over to me and he said, I know you're going to the academy, and I just want you to know that the first year is rough, and don't let all the little stuff get to you. And that can be applied pretty much to life as we know it. Don't let the little stuff get to you and you'll be all right. So still remember the story, probably will for the rest of my life, and I thought that was great advice.
Is it an asset or a liability to have the name Paul Tibbetts?
What do you think?
Don't answer. Let me inject something, ladies and gentlemen. When he graduated from jet training at Williams Air Force Base in Arizona, I was out there for that graduation exercise, and I saw the training that he got, the sophistication and everything. Now here he is. He doesn't have three. Did you have 300 hours of
Oh,
flying?
no, just under 200.
Huh?
Just under 200.
Just under 200 hours of flying time, and he already had orders putting him into the B-1. And this deputy commander, the training commander, they're a big man, an Italian fella, a nice person. And I waited my opportunity, and I walked up to him, and I said, he's two-star general. I said, General, can I ask you a question? He said, hell yes, you can ask me a question. What do you want to know? I said, that kid, I said, he got 300 hours of flying time. He's assigned to the B-1. Is that because of his name? Or he says, no, goddamn it wasn't because of his name. It's because of him. We watch these young fellas and we profile. He's the profile we want in that airplane. That's why he's there. I shut up.
I am married, by the way. Jerry asked that. It wasn't a question, but it leads to my next point here. I was sitting down with my grandfather one day, and I said, you know, we don't have any children. And I said, if I have a son, I'd like to name him Paul V, because I'm the fourth. I'd like to name him Paul V. And he looked at me. You remember what you said?
Yeah.
He looked at me. He goes, why do you want to put that on the poor kid? And I looked back at him right away, and I said, well, how do you feel about me? What'd you tell my folks? And he said, they never asked. I personally think, we'll finally get to your question. I personally think it's outstanding. I couldn't ask for a better name. I mean, think about having someone like this as your grandfather, knowing these men and what they did and being able to have a personal relationship with them. Not very many people can say that. Obviously, what he did is something that we look at and go, wow, that's awesome. Well, you got to understand that what he did when he was 20, in his late 20s, was unheard of, to lead a group of people through something like what he led them through. Remember, I'm 30, almost 32 now. Of course, you see what rank I am. Still a captain. And he was a lieutenant colonel turning colonel at the time. So what an awesome responsibility. So I tell people, when they ask me about the name, I say, yeah, I was just born with the name. You know, I didn't ask for it, didn't deserve it, didn't earn it, was just born with it. And so I live my life today as well as I can on my own, living my own life, trying to make my own name, and not walking around going, hey, you know, I got a pretty cool granddad, what do you got? And, you know, if you live your life like that, and you live your own life, in my opinion, then nobody can ask anything more from you. So, yeah, I have a great grandfather. I totally respect him. I honor him. And it's a privilege to be able to say that I have the name Paul Tibbets, but I don't walk around, you know, announcing it to everyone. So.
I don't know if many of you were at got a chance at the museum today to see a lithograph that's hanging there called The Legacy. About 7 months ago, General Tibbets came up to me and said, you know, I've had a lot of lithographs done by various artists showing the B-29 and the Red Gremlin. And he said, I'd like to do something that would have a combination of the B-29 and my grandson's, the modern Air Force's B-2. And I think that was like a tribute from General. I'm
Like, you know, guy from the Marines knows. The lithograph that my grandfather basically surprised me with is outstanding. The artist did such a wonderful job representing. Just think about the legacies that are represented. The 509th Bomb Composite Group, which these gentlemen started, is the wing that I'm in now, and it's the same wing. He's the first commander, and I'm now in the 509th Bomb Wing, flying the B-2. And so that's one of the many themes that you can see running through that lithograph that was produced by these gentlemen. So what a tribute, and I was surprised by it, which made it even more special. I guess a short answer to the B-2 is it's a fantastic and intriguing airplane that unless you sat in a simulator and experienced it, it's kind of hard to describe. But I told a young man or a young girl, I forget today in line, I said, you know, it's kind of like comparing an old beat up, I had a 68 Dodge Dart when I was growing up, and that's what my parents gave me to drive, to the fanciest sports car you can think of. Well, I get to fly the fanciest sports car right now. And it's just a privilege to be able to do that. As you can imagine, there's only gonna be 20 airplanes. We only have 10 right now. Less than 50 pilots. It'll always be an extremely small community, and it will always be a very selective process to get into that community. So you can understand what a privilege it is to be in that airplane and be flying, and especially in today's Air Force with all the downsizing. Very exciting, very intriguing, and I just want you to know, and I truly mean this because it's my tax dollars too, that your tax dollars were well spent. That airplane has got quite a capability, and it will carry us, and it has to carry us in quite a ways into the future, because we don't have anything coming up. There's no new bombers online that I know of, and so we need this technology, and we need it to last. So feel good about it. I do.
Tony, we're gonna run over time. Does anyone want to leave? I've got a few more questions to ask. Is that all right to go? Well, I'm going to be the first one out the door. No, I heard you mention that we're going to finish this at 8:55. I don't know if that means Sandia wants us out of here at 9 o'clock, or if we could go a few minutes beyond that. Okay. Has the Balmer, and this is probably a question for both of you pilots, has the Balmer become an obsolete branch of the Air Force, especially with submarines, the submarine fleet, and ICBMs as deterrents?
Now, give me that one word again. Is it become what?
Has the Balmer become an obsolete branch of the American nuclear weapon arsenal?
Okay, let me say right now, no and hell no. It's a long ways from being obsolete. It's the only thing that we got that can go out and be called back if we have to call it back. The rest of them, they're on their way, they're going to go to the target. And not that we shouldn't do it, but there may be reasons. It could be a false alarm, and they start shooting missiles back and forth and all that. If something goes wrong, you got a human servo in that B-2. You don't have it in the rest of it. The human servo can rationalize. It can do a lot of things that the other computers can't do.
It's right on tap. A lot of people say, let's get the man out of the loop. We don't need him in the loop anymore. Well, as you know, machines are never perfect as much as we try to think they are. And we just can't solely rely on a machine all the time. It just is not reliable enough. Here's a perfect example. I worked on a B-1 crash back in February where the airplane basically shut itself down. All the engines were shut down. The crew ejected all safely, and the airplane crashed in a farmer's field, and we're lucky it didn't kill anybody on the ground. It crashed because a 100% reliable circuit board shorted out in the fire panel and shut down all the engines, which is what the fire panel is supposed to do if you have a fire. But they didn't have a fire. Well, they did in the circuit board, but not in the engines. And shut down that little, I'm talking circuit board, this, 6 inches by 2 inches high, caused that $250 million B-1 bomber to crash, and of course was totally destroyed. So if we take the man out of the loop, then we're totally relying on technology that may not be there for us. So.
What do you think about the direction our country is going today? That's not the main question I'm going to leave for. That's the next. And this is directed to all of you, except for you, because I guess they figured you don't. No, it's directed to all of you. What direction do you feel our our country is going in today?
The wrong direction. We should do what I think Teddy Roosevelt said. We should speak softly but carry a big damn stick and use it when we have to.
Dutch?
Well, from an overall country standpoint, I think the country is going downhill. I don't understand a lot of the things that we see on television today, reading the newspapers, that we see exhibited by some of our leaders, and that type of thing. I'm not a moralist. I'm not a very religious man. I have been known to take a drink occasionally and a few things of that type. But I think there has to be a limit someplace beyond which we do not go. And I think we're pushing that limit pretty hard. I don't think our educational system is teaching our young people the things they really need to know and should know. Although the young people are going to school more today, I think today the college education is equivalent to what a high school education was back before the war. And I think there's some place you have to stop it. I don't think you can, I don't know how you rationalize the free speech and that sort of thing with the abuses that some people take with it. And I believe that is the type of thing that has to stop, and we have to get back to a more honest and viewpoint from our leaders and that sort of thing, to where we can trust them and we know what their word is going to be.
I can't add much to that.
I'm going to tone this question down a little bit. How do I reword that?
You talking about the
Bottom part.
second part there?
Yeah, because I know what.
Just asking your opinion.
What's your opinion of the leadership in our country today? Specifically, President Clinton.
Tom, tell me to answer that question.
Well, I'm a Democrat, but I'm kind of ashamed of what's going on up there. That's about all I can say about the situation.
Dutch?
Well, I'm not a Democrat. Number one, and I'm also ashamed, however, and I think that's a real good word for it. The economy's good, you can't fault that and everything, but I think there's more to the world than what the economy is doing if you don't have the leadership that you can trust.
You gonna say?
I didn't hear very well what Dutch said, but I got an opinion of my own. I don't think we got the kind of leadership that we need. We got to have somebody that believes in this country first and will do what is right and good for this country before we start worrying about anybody else. We've got our noses in too much business that is none of our business. And we're degrading our armed forces by making them go out and become peacekeepers in some places. That bothers me. We're not getting the money into the programs of the defense systems that we need to keep ourselves secure. I could go on for that for a long time. I just don't believe we got what I'd call red-blooded leadership in this country at all.
Yeah, I won't comment, of course, on the political situation.
No, he's wearing a uniform. He
But
can't.
I will say that one of the things that bothers me the most today is that it seems that our country was founded on basic moral and religious principles, and in my opinion, it seems like we've gotten a long way away from those. So for all the young people that are out there, don't forget that. It's not a very difficult thing. It's what is the basis for all of us as a person. So keep that in your cross check, so to speak, and remember what's important. I want y'all to know. I guess, are we getting ready to wrap it up, Jerry?
Yeah.
I want you to know, as a standpoint from an officer in today's Air Force, that we have a lot of very motivated and highly professional people in today's Air Force. Unfortunately, a lot of times their motivation is is crushed or somewhat harmed by the environment that they're in. And so it's incumbent upon all of us, and I want you to know that we're doing the best that we can as an Air Force as a whole to continue to motivate our young people. It's still a great place to be, and it's a great place to work, and it's more important than ever to get good people in our Air Force today. I like to make sure that when I talk to young people that I encourage them to give us a shot, because yeah, we're small and the numbers are declining, but it's a great place to work, and there are so many opportunities in today's Air Force. I'm very excited about what I do. I love what I do, and 2/3 of my friends are getting out of the Air Force, so it's a struggle in today's economy to keep people in. Great place to work, and I truly thank all of you for your support, because without it, our Air Force would probably even be worse off than it is. We need to continue to fight for strong armed services, armed forces in our country today. So thank you for your support as well.
I want to thank you all for coming tonight, in particular the people who came last night, and the sound system, the Sandia people forgot about the show, and we felt real bad about that, but General Tibbetts and the crew did not want to do something that wasn't 110%. So I hope you enjoy the show tonight. I have only one request. They've been up since 6 o'clock this morning, signing books all day today. They're extremely tired, and if you could please let them leave without stopping them. I know you probably want to say things to them. They're going to be in the bookstore again tomorrow at 11 o'clock. So please honor this request that we let them leave so they can go back in a short period of time and get some rest. I'd appreciate it, and I won't have to injure anyone. Thanks a lot.
Thank you all. I'm going to have to take